Some people have to come and sit in the front. That's right. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to introduce Cynthia Carter Ching to you today. I've worked with her for a number of years, and I'm really excited about her work. I had the opportunity to actually write a blurb for her most recent book, which I highly recommend, which is called Constructing the Self in a Digital World: Learning in Doing, Social, Cognitive, and Computational Perspectives. And it's a really exciting book that really talks about all the different identities that students can take on as they engage with various parts of the digital world. And I don't think it's limited to students. I like taking on new identities in the digital world myself. So it's really a great book. I encourage you to look at it. And Cynthia Carter Ching has a marvelous background to bring to this work. She worked with Yasmin Kafai at UCLA and actually with Jeff Sachs, who's here, as well, when she was a graduate student. She's now at UC Davis and has really established a fascinating research program that I know you're going to enjoy hearing about. One of her important awards was the Jan Hawkins Early Career Award from AERA, Division C, which is a really great honor and very well deserved based on her work. I had a chance to interview her a little bit before the talk, and I did ask her about her gaming practices, since I thought we'd all want to know. And she said that she did play World of Warcraft for one summer. I think she's ahead of me. I'm at level 10 and proud of it. But she says now she primarily plays games that are desired to be played by her sons, who are 8 and 13, I think. So she's playing games that are on the Xbox. So you can also ask her about that. I'm sure she'll be able to tell you some of the educational benefits of those activities. But I really am looking forward to hearing her talk, and I'd like to welcome her to our series. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcia, for that introduction. It's lovely. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming. I'm really happy to be here. So today I'm going to talk to you about games, learning, health, and sociopolitics. Lessons learned so far from exploratory research on fitness gaming with underserved youth. This is actually a relatively new area of research for me. The team I'm leading of learning scientists, health researchers, and game designers has just started our second year of this project, and it's currently funded by an exploratory cyber learning grant from the National Science Foundation. Now I'll get more into the scholarly research angles on what we're studying in a few minutes, but the upshot of this project is to give youth wearable activity monitor devices, which, if you're not familiar, are basically like more sophisticated pedometers. Have them play a narrative-driven online game that our team has designed that takes the data from these devices and uses it to drive the action in the game, and then study what happens. So I'd like to start my talk today with a story about an experience I had recently while trying to get some additional funding for this work, not from NSF Cyber Learning, but from a different, smaller funding entity which shall remain nameless, that focused just on California. And so last spring, this call came out for innovations in health promotion for high-risk populations. Right? Okay, that sounds interesting. And what we wanted to do was study how our existing project could be brought to a middle school in a community in the Central Valley that has a high percentage of migrant families, and also has some fairly alarming health statistics for things like obesity, diabetes, and other metabolic kinds of issues. And not coincidentally, this town already has some fairly strong ties with public health researchers at UC Davis. So we submitted a proposal that would not only bring our existing technologies, but also provide the school with iPads that kids could check out and use to track their data, play the game, use apps, have various kinds of health apps, etc. We didn't get the money, but more than that, we got two basic messages from the review board on our proposal, both of which were profoundly disappointing, but sadly not particularly surprising. Okay, so the first one was, according to them, that our health promotion model was clearly backwards, because, as everyone knows, video games are a cause of childhood obesity, not the solution. and thus our, quote, intervention was likely to make the problem worse rather than better. So it was obvious to us that while we were operating on an activity model of games and health that looks something like this, you've got your Wii Fit, Dance Dance Revolution, it's fairly common. They were operating on a model of games and health instead that looks something like this. Incidentally, when you Google image the phrase overweight gamer, 99% of the returns are really like exploitative. So I picked this one from South Park because at least it's like meant to be ironic. Anyway, so that was the first piece of feedback. This, basically. And then the second was that we clearly had the wrong idea about technology and poverty. And somehow we were being naive. We couldn't possibly bring wearable activity monitors and iPads to youth in this area because they weren't, quote, appropriate for this population. And the technologies would, quote, disappear, i.e. get lost, get stolen, get sold, etc. So it became obvious to us again that while we were thinking about fitness technology users who looked something like this, and in fact, these are photos of kids in our project last year in urban Sacramento who were wearing and using their activity monitors. But the review board was clearly operating on a model of fitness technology users that looked instead like this, right? As if hip, middle-class, well-resourced adults are the only people who could be trusted with, or perhaps deserve to use, commercial marketplace technologies to improve their health. So when we got these two pieces of feedback, initially, we all did this. But then, after some heated discussions, we sort of took a step back and realized that these deep divides in working models weren't just knee-jerk reactions on the part of the reviewers. Well, okay, they kind of were. But in fact, also, they're representative of some significant tensions in the existing research conversations that this work participates in. So, over the past decade, there's been increasing attention paid to the question of whether or not there really is a direct relationship between the amount of time children and youth spend playing commercial video games and the increasing incidence of child and adolescent obesity. The assortment of studies here is just a sample of a very wide field. What's up here includes some really interesting reviews and sort of meta-analyses of these kinds of studies. And many of them find medium to strong correlative relationships between obesity and gaming. But then, there's always this sort of unanswerable chicken and egg question, right? Plus, meta-analyses reveal that gaming in these studies sometimes gets lumped in with a larger category of activities, sometimes called sedentary behavior or screen time. So parsing out specific relationships becomes extremely difficult. But regardless of the answer, this question of whether or not time spent gaming is somehow preventing youth from being more physically active has been a genuine concern in the health field for more than a decade. I find it interesting, personally, that around the same time, in sort of the early to mid-2000s, that learning scientists started turning their attention to the positive affordances of games for learning, led initially by Jim G. and some other people. There's this parallel but almost entirely separate negative research conversation about the games in child and adolescent health. So that's sort of, around 10 years ago and somewhat later. More recently, however, there's been this explosion of development and research on games explicitly designed to enhance and manage health. So positive results are being shown for everything from physical therapy, to cerebral palsy, to diabetes management, to cancer remission. So yeah, I said cancer, right? There are actually studies that show that kids who play this visualization game where it depicts battling cancer cells during their chemotherapy sessions actually have higher incidence of remission than kids who get either no game or some sort of unrelated game that's not visualization, which is sort of both insane and amazing when you think about it. So what the Games for Health movement overall is showing is that turning the otherwise difficult and unpleasant process of dealing with injury and disease into something more enjoyable through making a game out of it is actually a really productive and promising approach. But as a learning scientist, rather than as a health researcher per se, I'm not just interested in health behavior, I'm also interested in learning and meaning, right? And so as such, I'm not sure that we want to treat fitness or even normative physical activity in the same way. As something otherwise difficult and unpleasant, we're going to gamify in order to make it more tolerable, right? Weird. But yet, that's exactly the approach of the majority of both research-based and commercial options in this arena. So this category of applications is often referred to as exergames. They're a variety of things. Some of them create a destination space for exercise, either in the home, in the arcade, in the gym, whatever, where you go to this technology and you do your exercising there. So commercial examples you might be familiar with are like the Wii Fit or Dance Dance Revolution I showed earlier. There are also games for like spinning with a bike controller, treadmill games, weight training games, etc. And then the other sort of approach are these applications and devices that are wearable or like pocket portable somehow, and they're designed to layer a gaming experience over other kinds of exercise or movement you might be doing anyway. So one example here in the corner is something called Zombies Run. And it's an iPhone/iPod app that tracks your running, and it also makes your runs more motivating by periodically interrupting your music stream with the sounds of zombies chasing after you if your pace drops below whatever target you're set. So, you know, you're going along, you're listening to your music, and you literally hear, the zombies are coming, as you're running, and, you know, you're supposed to run faster. I've tried this game, it drives me crazy, I hate it. But it's a very successful game, so clearly lots of other people like it. And then down here, the Strive is a handheld device that basically layers a fantasy world you navigate in the game over physical space. So what happens is you might be like standing still waiting for the bus or something, and you've got a few minutes to spare, and all of a sudden your game pops up with, say, a pot of gold that's like 30 yards away that you could walk over and get. So you physically walk over to it, pick it up in the game, walk back and, you know, continue waiting for the bus, right? And then you've gotten in, you know, more activity. So depending on which of these things you think would be cool, and everybody has sort of a different sense of, oh, I might like to try that, they may in fact increase your daily physical activity, right? Which in and of itself is a good thing. But these devices and applications aren't designed to inform any kind of transformative thinking about your life and your fitness-related behavior. They're just designed to make your exercise time itself, whenever that is, more fun, more enjoyable, etc. So they promote exercise, but they don't necessarily promote thinking or reflection. Okay. There are other approaches to exercise and physical activity that do promise to stimulate thinking and reflection. So a movement which is really gaining a lot of traction in some circles is called the quantified self. And it operates under the assumption that people will make better choices about their daily lives if they have this sort of wealth of information to draw from. So individuals who participate in this movement employ a wide variety of devices to both actively and passively log data about themselves on a daily basis. So activity monitors or pedometers or whatever are just the tip of the iceberg for these people. There are applications and technologies that will keep track of your water intake, your sleep patterns, your carbon footprint, your calorie intake, your vitamins, your supplements, your blood alcohol content, your grocery shopping, etc. There's even a fork now that logs how you eat, how fast, how many bites you take per, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, how frequently, how long you spend eating, etc. So these people are sometimes also called life loggers. Don't necessarily want to look at a ton of individual devices every single day. So there are things like desktop and iPad programs that sync many of these devices together and give you this integrated display of all your data at once. Now, depending on what kind of person you are, you might either think this sounds great or that it kind of sounds like a nightmare. Right? But regardless, it requires a lot of financial outlay. Right? Not just in terms of the devices themselves, but in terms of the computing power and the sort of real-time Wi-Fi, Bluetooth syncing required to support and integrate the data feeds from all these things. Which is one reason why you almost never see this kind of approach in health promotion research. and especially with low-income participants or like non-tech savvy participants, like seniors, for example. So when we look at the kinds of studies in health education and health promotion that employ activity monitor devices, they're almost always just pedometers, rarely anything more sophisticated, and they're almost always device only. Because we're going to give you this thing. We're not going to give you any sort of other display of other way of interacting with your data, like a quantified self approach. And we're really not seeing studies yet that have integrated apps or other kinds of software support. Doesn't mean they're not going on. The publication bottleneck is what it is. But as far as the consensus of research goes, it's predominantly pedometer only. So when the subjects of these studies are children and younger youth, researchers typically are the audience for the data that gets produced. We want to know how much children are active in schools that have, say, cut down on PE versus schools that haven't, etc. So the children themselves aren't the audience for this information. Very often the devices kids wear in these studies don't actually have active displays at all. Or if they do, they show something simple like a pixelated figure that's sort of running or walking or sitting or in some cases lying down, right? Teens occasionally get displayed devices, but these studies are often done with overweight youth, and so they find that the pedometers themselves aren't particularly effective. Unless you get a whole peer group together in a study and they're sort of motivating one another, but then sort of parsing out the effects of the technology versus the effects of the social setting versus whatever is very difficult. When adults are the subjects of these studies, sometimes the research just focuses on outcomes. Did people move more? Did they lose weight? Did they lower their cholesterol, etc.? Rarely there are studies that look at barriers to use, but not very often. And these studies usually focus on barriers either inherent in the devices themselves or in people's ability to use them. And rarely situate the practice of use within the whole sociocultural context of somebody's life and the various kinds of activities they typically engage in. Most studies find that giving people target step counts to work toward is more successful than just telling people they should have a certain number of active minutes per day. That tends to be more diffuse and less immediate. But there's a pretty solid consensus in this pedometer research that when they work, pedometers are fairly successful at motivating short-term activity increases, but that activity drops off after a while, and people sort of go back to their sedentary kinds of routines. So they're not great on their own, these technologies, at motivating long-term or sustainable change. Okay. So given all these existing studies and our own interests, we pose the following question. How can we create sustainable engagement and motivation for physical activity among youth using activity monitors? And how might a game work for this purpose? Right? If the device itself isn't sufficient, what other kinds of existing sort of either motivators or ways of interacting with the data or making plans and having a more long-term perspective might work? Could you do this with a game? How do you think about the information they're getting from their activity monitors and what kinds of behaviors result? Right? So not just, okay, so I put this thing on you, do you move more? But what do you actually think about the information that you're getting? And then what is required to support activity monitor use among underserved youth in particular? This is not a question that people tend to ask in this work. Okay. So the team we've developed to address these questions involves researchers from learning sciences, health and nutrition, and public health at UC Davis. A commercially available activity monitor called Fitbit, which we chose partially because we like the form factor, but mostly because it has an open source API. So it's really easy to just grab their programming interface once you've registered with Fitbit as a developer and create a third-party application around it. This is not the case for any other device currently on the market. They're all proprietary software, proprietary data. Getting access to that data stream and doing anything with it is very, very difficult. And then we're actually working with professional game designers, as opposed to just sort of assuming, oh, I'm a learning scientist. I have an idea for a game. Let me get some computer science grad students and we'll build that, right? Which is typically the preventative approach. But the game designers we're working with are from an indie company out of San Francisco called Phenomena, which was founded by Robin Hudnicky and Martin Middleton, both formerly of EA, LucasArts, and that game company. If you're a gamer, you might know them better as the executive producer and lead programmer for a game for PS3 that swept the awards last year called Journey. So maybe that means something to you, maybe it doesn't. But they've hired a bunch of programmers, designers, and artists for their new indie, and currently one of the games on their arsenal that they're creating is ours. So incidentally, Phenomena has a Games for Good agenda, which means that they donate some of their time to social good projects. So while we are in fact paying them out of our NSF grant, we are not actually paying them what they're worth. Thank God. So that would be like all of our grant right there. All right, so we've worked with Phenomena to create Terra. And I should say right up front that not only were we working with the game designers, but we were also working with kids in our participating after-school project, an after-school program to design the games. So there was a lot of conversation between the designers and us as researchers, but also between the designers and the kids about what kinds of games do you like already, what do you think would be fun, what kinds of things do you like to play, what about this idea, what about that idea, that sort of thing. So the game we created is Terra. And as a player in the game, the story you experience is that you're part of a team of astronauts and scientists that gets sent to a planet thought to be mostly unfit for human habitation. And you have to lead your team in building a base, exploring the planet, terraforming, finding resources you can use, encountering and sometimes taming or otherwise making use of the planet's creatures, and then discovering what happened to the ancient civilization that used to live there. And it was really interesting when we were having conversations with the students about what they like to play. You know, a lot of them said these, violent video games, sort of shooter, Call of Duty kinds of things, boys in particular. But what they really, really liked, their absolute favorite, Minecraft. They really liked the idea of a world that you could explore and you never knew what you were going to encounter next. And it was both mysterious and also a little bit threatening, but you could be creative in it. And so that was part of what inspired the game, which I thought was interesting. Because despite all of the conversation about, can we shoot stuff? But we ended up with this as the design, and the kids are really happy with it. So these are some, it's hard to see there, artist concept drawings for the terrain. And so here you see sort of the base, and here's the little spaceship, and then there are some ruined and abandoned dwellings of the ancient civilization. And these are some artist renderings of the explorers and the ancient peoples, and some of the interesting creatures that you can find on the planet. And then this is a wide terrain view of the game interface itself. This is relatively new, incidentally. The game went from several fairly primitive prototypes last year to this over the summer. And so our kids this fall are getting ready to see it with the final art in it, and I'm very excited about that. It's basically a tile-based game designed to be played online via a web browser. So the technological specs we're working with are not huge. This is not a PS3 game, right? So Fitbit steps get converted into moves in the game. And you can use your moves to explore more terrain tiles, develop the terrain you have. So here they're growing some crops, there's some mining, etc. Build up your base, find creatures, feed yourself and your team of explorers, fortify your base against natural disasters, etc. So last year was year one of the project, and we spent it primarily learning about how youth would react to Fitbits and what they would think of them, and having them test out various less developed to more developed versions of the game. So we had 25 student participants in a Sacramento after-school program, ages 12 to 14. There were 9 girls and 16 boys, and when you say you're going to do a project about games and who wants to volunteer, the fact that we got 9 girls in addition to 16 boys I thought was really good. Because I was expecting, I'm like, are we going to get any girls at all? I think the fact that our executive producer and lead designer is also a woman was a big draw in the writing. So we started gaining access and getting to know the students in November of last year. We first put Fitbits on them in January, and then we had 3 game play tests in February, April, and May of last year. So we have 4 months of Fitbit syncs for the kids. And during that time, we also conducted focus groups, individual interviews, questionnaires, and we did sort of pre-post BMI measurements just because it's health research and you kind of have to do that. Although it was really a development year, so we weren't necessarily expecting to see, big intervention type changes. So here are some photos of kids here playing a very early prototype. And here they're talking with Martin, who's our lead programmer, about finding a bug in the game. This is really funny. The kids be like, my screen crashed. And Martin comes running over and he goes, oh my gosh, you found a bug. Oh, that's great. I'm going to go write that down. So it turned from this very frustrating sort of, I lost all my points to, yay, oh, you good. This is what we do in design. And start talking about that. It's funny. And then here's one of a bunch of kids gathered around Robin as she is showing them different ideas for the look and feel of the art in the game. And actually the kids picked that really cute sort of chibi style look of the explorers and the animals I showed earlier with the big heads and the small bodies. Okay. So what are some of the things we found so far in the fairly preliminary pass through some of the data? In our interviews and focus groups about their experiences wearing the Fitbits, we found that for many of the kids there's this interesting tension that emerges between constraints and opportunities. So they started out comparing their step counts with one another and discovering that certain kinds of routine activities, like for example walking to and from school, had a big effect on step counts. But then some of them started talking about the fact that they couldn't walk to school, some of them, because they lived too far away, or because they lived on the other side of the freeway, or because it was almost dark by the time after school got out and they had to walk through sort of a tough neighborhood, right? The way the boundaries are laid out for the school are really weird. But so then what happened was they started seizing opportunities within the sort of bounded space of school to increase the number of steps that they got. So we noticed some kids in our project would walk around the soccer field talking after eating lunch rather than just sitting and hanging out at the tables. Girls in our project said that they actually participated more in PE than usual because it was a good way to get more steps. And so I asked, well, what did you do before in PE? And they're like, well, not do it. Okay. Many of them told stories about how they perceived the value of the Fitbit device itself. If you're not familiar, you'll go to Best Buy or you'll go to the Apple Store or whatever, and you see it for sale. Right? It's a commercially available device, and they're worth about $100. And so kids told dramatic stories about almost loss. Like, oh my God, it almost went in the laundry in my jeans, and I fished it out at the very last minute, and I panicked. It told stories about sibling or peer jealousy over the Fitbit. Like, girls in particular had very jealous brothers. They had this fitness device, and the brothers didn't. Well, I don't know, I'm in the after school, you could get it. And they said they really liked the encouraging messages that it displayed with their names. Like, saying, go, Felipe, go! Or, very cute. Interestingly, though, they were much more interested in the device display information and its immediate feedback than what they could get from their profiles on Fitbit.com. So we took them all to the website and set them all up, and we brought in these, carts of laptops. And they could log in and see their data displayed in lots of different patterns, like weeks and months, and most active days, least active days, when your most active time of day is, etc. But they weren't particularly interested in this. They found it sort of dull. Didn't really get a whole lot out of that sort of data visualization sort of thing. Which we were like, okay. We were hoping that they would be really interested in not just the immediacy of the device, but the visualization over time. They weren't. And when we did BMI measurements, we found no difference between about December and May. Some people in the health field have argued that no change is good news, because at least that means youth aren't becoming more unhealthy, but we weren't really excited about this. We're like, okay. So then we've been looking at the data streams from the Fitbits themselves. And we're still doing this, and it's really a lot to parse out. But I did kind of want to show you this chart of all the data device downloads from individual users over time throughout the project from February to May. Because what you can see is there are these two big clusters of activities, here and here. And then you've got some zero counts scattered throughout, right? That's basically, I forgot to wear my Fitbit today. And then there are clearly up here a few kids who sort of went nuts with the Fitbit right when we gave it to them, and sort of moved nonstop, and they've got like 30,000 steps, which is a lot. But then it sort of normalizes after that, right? But then here's this fairly blank space in the middle, where it looks like we haven't got a lot of activity, or at least a lot of missing data, right? So what we find, if we try to interpret that we just looked at, is that those clusters of data are around the first playtest date in late February, and then two later playtest dates in April and May. And so when kids knew that their data would show up in the game for playtesting, they were much more consistent about wearing their Fitbits and logging steps. We noticed that a few youth do forget to wear, or even occasionally lose their Fitbits, about 10% of the kids. We only had about 2 lost Fitbits the entire project last year. But really not nearly as many as we feared, and not nearly as much as that review board seemed to think would happen, right? And actually, the loss rate amongst the kids was about comparable to the loss rate in the project team, when you factor in designers and researchers and postdocs and grad students. And we had a couple of losses also. I almost lost my Fitbit story when I told the kids that I had worn my Fitbit shopping at the mall and tried on a bunch of different things, and then I discovered it on the floor in a dressing room. It was like, oh no, and put it back on my clothes. And they all thought this was hilarious. They went around telling each other, Dr. C almost lost her Fitbit. Oh my God. So, I think it was comforting to them that it wasn't that they were being irresponsible. It was sort of a hazard of having this sort of device. But so that whole urban kids can't be responsible for personal technology thing sort of went right out the window last year. It's interesting. But the nearly blank spot in the middle of the data really gave us some pause. And so we thought about what happened during those weeks. And we realized that it wasn't that the kids were unmotivated during that time. It was that they were unsupported. The kids weren't not walking during that time or somehow abandoning their Fitbits, because otherwise what you would see is a whole lot of clusters of zeros right here, right? So, but instead, the kids weren't not walking during that time. They were not syncing, so their data got lost. So a Fitbit actually only holds about a week's worth of data at a time. And if it isn't synced, earlier data starts to get erased and replaced by later data. So during those 3 weeks of that spread of time where it looks kind of blank, UC Davis had spring break, and then the school that we were working with had spring break, and then we all went to AERA, and the design team went to many, many awards shows for Journey. So what we discovered is that the kids weren't syncing from home because they didn't have the necessary technology to be able to do that. And they needed us to be at the research site with the computer set up with the Fitbit sync devices so their data can be uploaded. Which is really humbling when you think about it from the sort of perspective of stereotypical responses to technology and poverty, right? It's not that the kids were being irresponsible, it was in a sense that we were being irresponsible, sort of not keeping up our end of the bargain, right? All right, so what are we doing differently in year 2, which is now? So this fall, we're actually working with the same after-school program in Sacramento, but we now have what's called Game Design Club. So the school has a lot of sort of club things that they do on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. there's anime club, there's arts and crafts club, there's a wide variety of different things. But we have what's called game design club. And in order to be in game design club, you also have to be in the project. But kids sign up and get RB permission and all that. So it's every Tuesday and Thursday for 8 weeks. The game, incidentally, is currently designed to be played in 8-week campaigns. Right? So you play the game for 8 weeks. And then once a campaign is done, you can go back and play it again. You can do it differently. Right? But 8-week campaign. And so every Tuesday and Thursday, we see them. We've got the computers out. We've got the syncing devices. So they're syncing. They're playing Terra. But we're also going to have them use GameStar Mechanic to design their own games, because a lot of them would really like to do that. They've had this experience of seeing what game designers do and working with them, and it's sort of they want to design their own games at this point. And then mixing in sort of research and game design club curriculum activities. So sometimes we'll do focus groups as part of what we're doing today in game design club, but it's a much more consistent presence that we're doing this long. And then in the winter, we're doing somewhat of a different thing in that we're going to be collaborating with 2 teachers at a middle school in Davis, one of whom teaches PE, and one of whom teaches a class called Integrated STEM. And they team teach these 2 classes together, so that kids in PE have been doing things like wearing motion capture stuff, and then doing athletics, and then they'll have everything set up on a computer screen, and they'll look at what is their motion capture like. They'll do things like film themselves doing video shooting baskets, and then look at their arc of trajectory and do some math with it. So they're already doing some of these kinds of integrating technology and the body and science thinking and learning. And so in the winter, they're going to do the 8-week campaign. They're going to play Terra, plus some other activities. But this fall, they're already using Fitbits. So what that will allow us to do is to compare their Fitbit data from now with just the Fitbits to what happens when you introduce a game into that equation, and really sort of be able to parse out what's the motivational or the learning or the visualization factor of being able to encounter your Fitbit data in a game, and what kinds of differences do you see. And also because it's Davis and we have a really wide spectrum of low income to very well off, so to students we expect to see a much wider spectrum of sort of at-home technology infrastructure. And that will allow us to look at the differences between what's the experience like for somebody who can sync at home, play at home, do a wide variety of things at home, versus having all of the also technology at school to resource people who don't have that level of infrastructure at home, and be able to compare those kinds of things. So after this year, which is year 2 of our Exploratory grant, we have some next steps that we're thinking we want to take it bigger, bolder, etc. We would still really like to do that Central Valley project that we got rejected last spring. And we're thinking of going back to NSF for funding. They issued a call recently for call for proposals called Smart and Connected Health, which I think will work really well with this. And they did in fact mention gaming as an option, so we're not likely to get that stereotypical response of no, games will make the problem worse. We're applying for the next level of NSF cyber learning, in which one thing we really want to look at is the idea of gaming and data literacy. Can we build into the game ways to engage with your data over a longer period of time and look at patterns, etc., in a way that might interest kids more than those kinds of visualizations on Fitbit.com that they are just not interested in at all. We're interested in studying sort of a game on its own versus a game as integrated into some sort of curriculum, versus what happens if you just have kids who are doing independent wear play. Right? What does that look like? As if it was just sort of a commercial thing that you picked up a Fitbit and picked up this thing off the shelf and that can be good. We also have sort of features that we're going to build into the game down the line that will allow either collaborative or competitive people to play in sort of colonies, right? So that we think that'll be interesting and layer sort of a social either motivation over the game design. So the idea being that, a bunch of people who are playing in a colony could decide, okay, we want to upgrade our base next week. So this weekend, everybody really needs to get on set, whatever. Robin and I have also been talking about this idea of games for good versus game designers for good. Right? I mentioned before that I thought one of the draws for the girls in the project was the fact that our lead designer is a woman. But there's also a sense in which I feel like a lot of kids are really excited about being in the project because they get to work with these professional game designers, right? So I would love to do a study focused sort of just on that, the idea of opening up career visions for people who have never thought about what does a game designer do. Just, I like games, games are cool, I want to design games, but they don't really know what that process looks like. And then, finally, I've been talking a lot with Martin, our lead programmer, who has friends and colleagues and connections with people who design hardware, to actually design devices. And there are some interesting sort of tensions that we're seeing between the Fitbit, which we like, but we also have some serious sort of reservations about in the things that it can do and it can't do, and the ways that they keep issuing newer and ostensibly better kinds of devices, but that are really geared toward the person who doesn't need to look at the interface immediately, right? So I have this kind of Fitbit, which has practically no display at all, and it offloads all the display onto my iPhone. So if I want to know, how I'm doing, I open up my iPhone and I click the app and I look at it. So there's this sort of tension between what happens if what if we were to build our own device that was specifically geared toward the needs of the students that we're working with and developmentally appropriate for a particular age level, and would give us the kind of data streams that we wanted, versus what are the advantages of using something that's already commercially available. Right. So ambitious. We may not do all of this in the next 2 or 3 years, but it's good to think big. Okay. So thank you very much for listening. And we have a lot of time for questions.
Fabulous, yeah. Questions. Ruby.
I just was curious, I don't know if they're, I was thinking as you're talking about gamification in general and Jane McGonigal, who has all this stuff about games for good, but they seem kind of, or I guess I only really know about Super Better, which is the one for helping people tackle rehabilitation after an accident or some sort of trauma, and they seem sort of confined to a short term, that part of what's built into it is that it's only a finite period of time to meet a goal. So I was wondering about the idea of gamification or something that's supposed to just be ongoing, and if there's research into that, or if that's something you guys have thought about, in trying to change a lifestyle, you want it to be a long-term change, but are there just endless reward, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, and it's a particularly good question when you think about sort of the differences between games for health research versus a lot of the research that, say, has come out of Madison, right, where they're thinking about games and identity, games and learning, and you have these people who have had the same avatar in World of Warcraft for 10 years, right? And it's this whole second identity that they've built up, and it's this ongoing sort of life that exists, right? And so then you take that and you compare it with okay, this is supposed to happen over 8 weeks, right? And so I actually think that for something to be ongoing like that, it does have to be identity-based and integrated and be meaningful in that way, right? Because you're right, if the sort of endless series of token economies is gonna get old. Sure. And even really successful commercial games, people rarely play them over and over and over again. Maybe you have your favorite one that you kind of revisit periodically, but mostly people like the new experience, right? And whatever they play already ends up in the bargain bin at GameStop. Yeah. So that's a really good question. And it is something that we've talked about. We are interested in the extent to which, and this is something that I think we're going to end up exploring a lot in sort of the next phase of the grant, the extent to which kids still have their Fitbits and still have access to the game after, the researchers have gone away, right? So to what extent might we see continued play? Which kinds of kids would you see continued play with? You'd have to go back and then interview them about why they chose to do continued play. What does that look like? Yeah. So that's a question. I don't have an answer. But it is something that we're interested in. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I was really curious about the lack of interest the kids had in, observing the data. And do you have any hypotheses why?
Well, that's interesting. It wasn't that they weren't interested in their data. It was that they weren't interested in their data abstracted.
That's what I was curious about. I was curious, wondering
Right.
Why. Do you have any ideas why, maybe?
Well, to a certain extent, some kids said things like, well, this isn't telling me anything I didn't already know, right? Like, oh yeah, no, I know that I'm, way more active on the weekends because I always play football with my brothers in the park. And, it's like all day we're doing that. And then mom says, okay, come eat, right? And then, right? So yeah, so to a certain extent it was, well, I already know this, right? And you've got kids reflecting a lot about the kinds of patterns they were seeing, but those kinds of patterns in their minds didn't seem to take the shape of a graph or whatever it was, right?
I was wondering about the graph, if they maybe they could have considered something like that.
Well, right, so there is some, right, I said I'm interested in data literacy, right? But part of what I'm interested in is whether or not there are other forms and other interfaces and other ways of engaging with that sort of data that's more abstract than just immediately, how many steps did I get for what I just did right now? That we could build into a game environment, right? Because certainly if you think about the kinds of research that gets done on commercial games and things like World of Warcraft, and there are whole, articles and books and things that have been published around what people do when they're crafting their avatar, right? And that in and of itself is ostensibly just getting ready to play the game, but they've, got all these hypotheses going about this kind of build versus that kind of build versus, and they're, playing with their statistics and saying, okay, I need to get to this level by this point because I want to, unlock this weapon or whatever it is, right? And so if you could get kids to then engage in finding patterns, making predictions, setting goals, that sort of thing within the game environment, then that would be another way of engaging with that data.
Awesome.
Was that data presented just solely as like, oh, this is what your exercise looked like, or was it presented as like, this is how your steps and exercise like relates to the game?
We tried to talk to them about this is what, so at one point we were going to convert their data from the last 2 weeks into playable data in the game. Just grab it and see what that looked like. We were debating whether or not this was the sort of thing that you needed to play on a daily basis, and whenever you synced it would just grab your most recent sync, or whether or not it would be over a longer period of time, so that way if you forgot to wear it yesterday you weren't screwed, right? But some kids were mostly just interested in their totals, right?
Yeah.
And so we tried to do things like point out, well, look, you can make it tell you what your most active day was. Or you can make it tell you when during the day you're the most active, right? But again, some of it was, well, I already knew that. So, and some of that might be a drawback of the way that the Fitbit.com website is set up as well. But we just thought it was interesting. We thought they were going to think that was cool. And particularly when you think about it from the perspective of like quantified self, right? Where people sort of get the sense of like, more data, some data is good, more data is better, right? Not necessarily.
Thank you. Now, this is a fascinating project. One thing for the terror game, is it more like an individual game or?
At this point, it is, but largely just because that's where we are in the development. Later, we'd like to build in this, you can play in colonies, and your colonies can either, compete with one another or, collaborate and do bigger things. So sort of, it should be able to be flexible depending on kids' playing styles. If you have a group of peers and they all want to play together, do they want to, battle it out and steal one another's resources, or do they want to, play collaboratively and go in together on something big?
I think it'll be interesting seeing how the game environment plays out too. Like, they're exercising, would they support each other or compete?
Absolutely. Well, and one of the reasons we decided that would be a good thing to do is because we noticed in the focus groups and just our observations of the kids every day that there were different collaborative versus competitive styles just in terms of how kids were talking about what they were seeing with their Fitbits and how they were using them. So we had one group of boys in particular who were really competitive about the Fitbit. And they, would go home and do all sorts of crazy things to, really, really up their steps, and then, look what I got, and, who got the most steps and that sort of thing. And then we had another group of girls who every day would walk around together, around school. And, we're all going to do this together, right? And go to so-and-so's locker, and then go to the snack bar, and then go walk around the soccer field, and then, right? As if they were building up this thing together. And so we thought, oh gosh, we'll do the whole mapping the technological to the social thing, and we'll create these different affordances for doing that sort of thing in the game. Yes?
I think you mentioned sort of in the earlier part of the talk about really being interested in also encouraging learning and reflection.
Yes.
And then sort of based on what we've seen of the game itself, it seems sort of not that connected to fitness in terms of the content, which I think might be like a really good choice in terms of engagement.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I've heard you talk a little bit about the data, but I was wondering if you could say a little more about, like, do you think there are ways to bring a little bit more of that into the game
Yes.
structure, or is this just part of the...
Well, so, I heard Mary Flanagan give a talk at Games Learning and Society this summer, wherein she said, if you want to design a game for learning that's fun to play, what you need to do is have only 20% of the content of that game actually be the target content that you want students to learn. Right? So we've got stuff about sustainability. We've got stuff about various kinds of food sources and nutrition. We've got stuff about the amount of energy that gets exerted during, the buildup of your colony and your base, and et cetera. And a lot of that's sort of analogical reasoning kinds of things to the kinds of reasoning that you would want people to do about their health and their behavior. And so she said only 20% of the content should be directly about what you want to teach. Another 20% can be suggestive of the target content. And the remaining 60% should be fun. Otherwise, there's a big difference between a game and an anvil. People know when you're hitting them on the head with content and it's not fun. And particularly since we were working with an after-school program, the more it looked like school, we figured the more kids were gonna, like, okay, I'm going to anime club, now goodbye. So, yeah. So there is some sort of sophisticated ideas going on behind the content of the game, and why the narrative is the way it is, and the kinds of decisions that you can make in the game. But we really didn't want to make a game about eating well and exercising. Yeah.
So how frequently were they able to effectively apply their Fitbit data to the game? Like, how often?
Well, so last year it was only 3 times.
Okay.
Because it takes a long time to make a game.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would do a play test, and the designers would go off and do a bunch of stuff, and then come back several weeks later, and it would be the next version of the game. The kids would play it and give feedback and find bugs and all sorts of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then several weeks later, right? So, so it really only happened 3 times last year. Right now, starting tomorrow, actually, every time they log in. which would be every Tuesday and Thursday. They will get the data from their previous sync applied in the game. So, yes.
Do you think if PE teachers encourage more reflection, that might make a difference in behavior, looking at data at an abstract level?
Yeah, well, I hope so. I'm not sure. And the thing is, I think it's not necessarily that these kids can't or won't or whatever do abstraction. I think it's that the interface that they've been presented with on Fitbit.com, which is your standard sort of bar graph, and here's your pattern. You were really active this weekend because it was a soccer tournament or whatever the heck it is. Just doesn't seem all that interesting to them, right? So this is why we're sort of interested in creating an alternative interface and an alternative narrative for that kind of data. And see what happens.
I was wondering to what extent you thought the kids' involvement, like their enthusiasm for the game, was due to the game itself or their actual having taken part in the design process.
Oh, yeah.
That seems like a really
Absolutely.
engaging
Yes.
thing. So.
Definitely. And that's part of my games for good versus game designers for good, right? I mean, I think that if you had a whole army of game designers, given how many are in San Francisco and the Bay Area and Silicon Valley and whatever, if you trucked them out to sort of underserved and under-resourced schools on a regular basis, and they just said, here's what game designers do, and here's some games that we're working on, and we'd like you to give us feedback on. That would be awesome, right? I mean, there are some ways in which some days I think that's the aspect of this project I like the best. But, yeah, so I think it's both. And I think as we eventually get to the point where we have something that's just sort of ready to roll out, then we'll be able to look at those differences, right? Because then they're basically getting something where they experience a game and they get the Fitbit and it all sort of nicely goes together. But, they don't have the award-winning designer show up several times and really want their feedback and want to listen to them. And, that's empowering. It's good.
So what aspect of the game do you think is promoting this kind of self-monitoring ability that you hope would be achieved by this interaction between the Fitbit and the game?
Right. So that's interesting. That's an interesting question. Currently, just based on the data stream from last year, they showed a big, messy dot chart. It looks like kids are much more motivated to log more steps when they know that they're going to see their data in the game.
Mm-hmm. Which would make sense, because they get more points and they can build more structures.
Sure, absolutely. And it also links up with a lot of the existing research, which shows that pedometers in and of themselves are great, but they have really short-term effects because there's sort of a novelty there. And you do a lot of sort of experimental, what if I do this, what if I do that, right? But the other thing is that health benefits from exercise are really difficult to realize in the short term. Right? Health psychology research demonstrates that that's one of the primary reasons why a lot of health promotion initiatives don't work very well, right? Is because when you tell a 12-year-old, well, if you move more and you're more active on a regular basis, you could potentially stave off a heart attack when you're 50. That's a long time from now for somebody who's 12. So having these sorts of intermediate rewards, right? And even if you have a kid who is, potentially battling type 2 diabetes and is already dramatically overweight and has a heart condition, and that's, what some of the kids there are a few of the kids that we're working with in this project that look like that. The target population we were looking at in the Central Valley, a lot of them are like that. Even still, it could take you 4 months to lose 2 pounds. Which is a long time. If losing 2 pounds is the only incentive that you have to look forward to, then that's the feedback that you're getting. Right? So.
Yeah, so how do you turn that into a self-monitoring and positive agenda? I guess it's still the open question. Well, thank you very much.
It is.
Very
And
exciting.
it's one that we're working on, but we don't have an answer yet.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you very much.